Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Chof Zayin Amud Aleph, starting with the new parak on Daf Chof Vav Amud Beis. Our parak discusses Tchumim, the prohibition of going 2,000 amos outside of your Makom Shvisa, either on Shabbos or on Yom Tiv. A Makom Shvisa is determined at the onset of Shabbos. Generally, it means the place where you're situated outside of the city limits. So if you're in the city, then it's 2,000 amos from those city limits in all directions. However, if a person is outside of the city and he's inside of a home, then it'll be 2,000 amos from the walls of that home. If he's not even in a structured home, then it'll mean 2,000 amos measured from his daled amos. Al kopanim, whatever that makom shvisa is, that's where the place where you can go ahead and go 2,000 amos in all directions. However, if a person wants to extend that makom shvisa in one direction, then he can make an eruv techumim. And therefore, if a person wants, for example, to then go beyond 2,000 amos in one direction, so he can change the makom shvisa from where he is situated to then where he would like to go from. So he can take, for example, where he is now and go 2,000 amos to the east, then be koine his makom shvisa with an eruv techumin, and then he can go and travel within 2,000 amos of that new makom shvisa. So he can go another 2,000 amos to the east. So he hasn't really gained more than 2,000 amos. He just changed his makom shvisa, whereby his original place, he would not be able to go even one amma to the west. As long as he has the eruv techumin in that new makom shvisa on the onset of Shabbos, and it's food that is edible and is accessible, then he has now been koine a makom shvisa in the onset of Shabbos to then be able to then go 2,000 amos in all directions from that makom shvisa. Says the Mishnah, Bechol ma'arvin u'mishtatfim. With all types of food items, a person can make an eruv techumim, and he can make shitufi mevois. Shitufi mevois is taking all of the various chatzeros that share the same mavui, the same alley, and they join together. Midrabanon, it is prohibited to then carry from the mavui to the chatzer, or the chatzer to the mavui. But by making a shituf mavuos, they can take the various the various chatzeros, and they can acquire together one bailus of the mavui by taking food from each chatzer and putting it into one chatzer. Similar to the concept of erev chatzeros. Instead of it being the batim getting together and joining to then have one bailus of the chatzer, the mavuos are going to then, the chatzeros are going to join together to make one bailus of the mavui. Chutz min hamayim min hamelach, however, this does not allow you to then make the eruv techumim or the shitufe mevois with salt or with water. Those are not considered to be things that have sustenance, that sustain. V'hakol nikach mikesef meiser. Now that we talked about an exception of food items when it comes to erev techumim and shitufe mevois, and those exceptions being mayim or melach, now we move on to other subjects that are not related to the subject of eruv, and we're saying that if a person takes meiser sheni, it says v'chakol nikach bekesef meiser chutz min hamayim u'min hamelach. In regards to meiser sheni, if a person has a field on the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle, he takes then from his field truma gedola, gives it a portion of that to the kohen. Then he gives meiser rishon to the Levi, that's 10%. Then he takes 10% called meiser sheni. That 10%, he then brings that produce to Yerushalayim and he eats in Yerushalayim. If he's outside of Yerushalayim, it's too hard, too cumbersome to carry to Yerushalayim. He can be poided that fruit, that produce, onto a matbeya, then bring that money to Yerushalayim and buy food and eat it in Yerushalayim. So here it states that he can buy the food in Yerushalayim, any types of food items, with the exception of mayim and melach. Another related din is that a person takes a neder and he says that anything that is going to be zon is prohibited upon myself. Hanoider min ha-mozoin muter b'melach u'v'mayim. Since mozon, that which is zon him, that will give some sort of satiation, is going to be excluding mayim and melach. Therefore, everything is going to be prohibited with the exception of mayim and melach. Ma'arvin lenazir. Now the Mishnah turns to places and things that a person may not be able to then be himself permitted to eat, but maybe somebody else will be permitted to eat. For example, ma'arvin lenazir b'yaim liyisrael b'truma. Back to the Indian of Eruv. If a person wants to make an Eruv techumin, and he's a Nazir, and he wants to do so with yayin, he may do so even though the Nazir himself cannot drink any grape products, including wine. But since somebody else can eat, or in this case, to drink the wine, therefore it's going to be valid Eruv. Ul Yisrael b'truma. Again, even though truma is off limits to Yisrael and is only permitted to be eaten by kohanim, still a Yisrael can go ahead and make it an Eruv techumim with truma, since a kohen could eat that truma. Sumchus oimer bechulin. Sumchus argues on the latter din, and he says that no, that the only way that a person, a Yisrael, can make his techumin, his erev techumin, is only going to be with chulin, but not with truma. But he does not argue with the reish of the case of the Nazir. What's the chiluk? What's the distinction? The Mefarshim explain, based on the Gemara, that the Nazir, he can technically go to a chacham and he can go ahead and get and be matir the neder of the nazirus, whereby he would ultimately be able to then eat, or in this case drink, from the wine, and therefore it's going to be valid. Whereas a Yisrael can never go ahead and eat the truma. Only a kohen can eat the truma, whereby the Yisrael, according to Sumchus, cannot make an erev techumin with truma, only with chulin. The Mishnah goes on to say other places of tchumin that might be off limits. For example, l'koyin bebeis hapras, a kohen who cannot go to a beis hapras. A beis hapras is a field where a dead body was buried there, and subsequently it was plowed. The Chacham said in such a place, if a person enters within 100 amos in all directions, he will become tamei, and therefore a kohen cannot enter a beis hapras. So here it states that a kohen in the Beis Hapras can go ahead and put his erev techum in the Beis Hapras. Why? Because a kohen, even though he's not allowed to enter the Beis Hapras generally, but if he is careful to then blow the dust before he walks, he'll be able to determine whether there is a bone there. So long as he then doesn't come across a bone the size of a barley, either by coming into physical contact with it or kicking it, then he's not going to become tamei. So therefore, as he walks, before he then takes his steps, he can go ahead and blow the dirt in front of him, the ofar in front of him, determining that there is no bone there, and he will not become tamei. So technically, he can put his erev techum in a beis hapras as well. Rabbi Yehuda Omer afilu ben akvarois mibnei sheyachol lachoitz v'leilech v'leechol. Rabbi Yehuda states that he can even put his erev techumin in a beis hakvaros, and of course a kohen cannot become tamei and not enter the beis hakvaros. But says Rabbi Yehuda, since he can technically put himself into a box, into an agola, in certain closed area that will be chaytzeis between him and the beis hakvaros, therefore he can technically go ahead and put his erev techumin inside and still have access to the food which is within the beis hakvaros. On top of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph with the new Gemara, says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan making the following statement: Ein lemeidim min haklolos. A person cannot learn from klolos, meaning to say, and not realize that there are also exceptions to the klal. Va'afilu b'makom shene'emar bo chutz. And even in a situation where there's a klal, and they say, aside from the certain exceptions within the klal, even that has different exceptions. So again, Rabbi Yochanan states over here that every klal has exceptions, and even when it says in the klal certain exceptions, there are even further exceptions sometimes. Midekamar, says the Gemara, from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan stated, and even a klal that it states chutz with the exception of certain things, michlal delav hocha koi. It follows that he's not discussing our mission because our mission does state chutz, and Rabbi Yochanan is talking about a certain klal where it doesn't say chutz, and he's saying that even though there might be a klal that says chutz, even that has exceptions. Heicha koi, asked the Gemara, where was Rabbi Yochanan stating this principle that when there is a klal, there's exceptions to the klal? Hasam koi, over there a Mishnah in Kiddushin. Kol mitzvahs aseh she'azman grama, anoshim chayovim v'noshim peturos. All mitzvahs aseh that are time-bound mitzvahs aseh, men are obligated and women are not obligated to perform. But if it's a non-time-bound mitzvah, then both men and women are obligated. So again, a time-bound mitzvah, for example, a mitzvah of Kriya Shema, which is Shacharis and Arvis, a man is obligated, a woman is not obligated. A non-time-bound mitzvah, a man and a woman are both obligated. Says the Gemara, v'klalahu, and this is a principle that we can say there's no exceptions to. The kol mitzvahs aseh jazman groma nashim peturos. All time-bound mitzvahs, women are absolved, they are potter from. Harei matzah, simcha, v'hakil, the mitzvah aseh jazman gromahu v'nashim chayavos. We have the mitzvah of matzah, it says ba'erev toichlu matzos. And Chazal learn out that women are also obligated because the very pasuk that prohibits man and woman from eating chametz, in the very pasuk there's a hekesh to learn out to eat matzos, and therefore women are also obligated to eat matzos by erev toichlu matzos. The mitzvah of simchas yomtiv, women are also equally obligated in, and that's a time-bound mitzvah. The hakel, as well as hakel, which is the beginning of the 8th year after the the end of 7-year cycle of the Shemitah year, the beginning of the 8th year on Sukkot, the king reads Sefer Dvarim for men, women, and Tov, the pasuk says. So women are obligated in Hakel as well, which is a time-bound mitzvah. They call mitzvahs aseh shelo yazman goma noshim chayavos. Also the other way. Are you going to say that it's a ironclad rule that all mitzvahs aseh shelo yazman grama, where it's 9 non-time-bound mitzvahs, women and men are obligated? There's no exception to that either. Harei Talmud Torah, Piri Veriva, Upidina Ben. The mitzvahs aseh shelo yazman grama v'nashim peturos. These are mitzvahs that women are potter from. For example, Talmud Torah, it's a non-time-bound mitzvah, and it says, women are potter from learning Torah. Piri Verivya, when it comes to the mitzvah of Piri Verivya, there's a special limud that Chazal learn out from the pasuk, stating that only men are obligated in the mitzvah of Piri Verivya. Pidin haben, there also Chazal learn out that although it's a non-time-bound mitzvah, that only those who are themselves needing to be redeemed, they themselves have the obligation to redeem. And therefore, since a woman doesn't need to be redeemed when she's a firstborn, she doesn't have an obligation to redeem her firstborn son. Ella, says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ein lemeidi min haklolois, va'afilu b'makom shenemar bo chutz. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan tells us that even when there is a klal, there are exceptions to the klal, and even when it states exceptions in that klal, there are also exceptions to that. Omar Abaye v'tema Rabbi Yirmiyahu. Abaye said, and if you want to say it was Rabbi Yirmiyah that said, Af ananami tanina. We also learn from the following: Oid klal acher amru, another klal that they stated in regards to tuma. Here we're talking about tuma of a zav. What's unique about a zav's tuma is that a zav has a tuma of midras when he then is going to sit or to stand or to lean on certain items, even if they themselves are not going to be touched by the zav. He can metama them and they will get the same status of tuma as he is. As a tuma of a high degree of tuma, that tuma of an avatuma will also transfer to these things. So it says over here, Od klal omru, kol shenisa al gabe hazav tami. Whatever is being carried by the zav, even though the zav is not himself in coming to physical contact with that item, but he carries it, he can take that object, that which is tahor, and become emetamid by carrying it. The kol she'azav nisa alov tahor chutz min haroid lemishkav u'moshe va'odam. And anything that the zav that I was referring to before is going to be underneath the zav, will be tar, with the exception of those things that are typically putting his weight on for sitting, when he sits on it, or if he lays on it, or the adam itself. Ask the Gemara, is this an ironclad rule that there are no exceptions? V'suleko, v'ha'ika, merkav. We know when it comes to merkav, when a person is riding, he's a zav and he's riding, that person who's riding will also metame the saddle. Ask the Gemara, hi merkav hechidami. What's the case of a merkav that when he's riding? Idi yasiva leya hainu moishav. If you're saying that he sits on it, that's moishav. So what's merkav? Anan hochikam. This is what we meant to say. Ha iko gabo de ukbo. There is the top part of the ukaf of the saddle. The Tanya ha ukaf tamei moishav. The saddle itself that he's sitting on, that's going to be tamei moishav. V'hatfus tamei merkov. Whereas the tafus is going to be tamei merkov. That means that the object that is on the top of the saddle, where he usually puts his hands on, he holds on to, that itself will become tamei of merkav. So we see an exception. Even when it says chutz, we also have exceptions to the rule. We also learned it, and this from our Mishnah. In every types of food item, you can use your erev techumim or your shitufei mevuos with all types of food items, with the exception of water or salt. Ask the Gemara, v'suleko, are there no other exceptions to that? V'ha'iko, kemein pitrios, different types of mushrooms. Elishmamina ein lemeidim min ha'klolos, v'afilu b'mokom shenemar bo chutz. Therefore, we learn out from here that there are exceptions to every rule, and even when the rule states exceptions, there are often exceptions to that.